So hi everyone, I am Yu Jie. So I'm a recent graduate from UNC Chapel Hill in the CDAC Summer Lab. So I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker today, Dr. Pedro Lopes, an assistant professor at Chicago CS, where he leads the Human-Computer Integration Lab. The research question Pedro's group focused on is, what if interface share part of our body? Pedro's team materialized these ideas by creating interactive systems that intentionally borrow parts of users' body for input and output. More than just a computer scientist and hardware thinker, Pedro is also a musician who plays turntables as a full-fledged instrument. So I have the privilege to work with Pedro in his lab this summer as a research assistant. So I'm especially excited for everyone to have the opportunity to hear more about his boundary pushing research. So please join me to welcome Dr. Lopes to Summer Lab Speaker Series. Yes.
Thanks, Yuji. That's very kind and awesome introduction. Share screen. And you all give me some kind of verbal heads up if you see the screen.
We can see it.
Is that the case? And when I full screen it, you should still be able to see it. Is that still the case?
Correct.
All right, awesome. All right, so that introduction covered a lot already, so that's great. I can jump right into two examples of my work. And I think these are two examples that demonstrate what I mean when I talk about integrating interfaces with the human body. So what you see here in this video, which I hope it passes along, you should be able to see two people drawing cars. Now, normally the task of figuring out if a car body is aerodynamic is conducted in a simulator, right? In a CAD simulator, you simulate the wind flow through a car and you find out if a design is good or not good. Now, these people are doing it a little bit differently than normal because they're trying to figure out the car aerodynamics and validate them by sketching cars in a piece of paper. So you should be also able to see a user with two cars drawn on a piece of paper and wind flow lines coming out of it, right? Now, what's kind of awkward about this is, well, how does the user know what the wind flow looks like? We wouldn't need a simulator if the user could just compute in their minds the aerodynamics of the wind passing through the cars. They would just be able to figure out which of these two cars is most aerodynamic. What's interesting about this application that I'm showing you right now is that these users actually do not know what's the output of the simulator, so they do need a simulator. The reason why their hand is drawing the lines as if they did is because their hand is being guided by these electrodes, which you should be able to see attached to the user's arm. And these electrodes are able to control the wrist moving to the left or right when they receive little electrical impulses. So you might know that your muscles are sort of little electrical machines that when they receive impulses, they involuntarily contract. Normally these impulses come from your brain. Here, we're sort of hijacking those and putting these electrodes, and we're able to control the wrist left or right. So effectively, this is a very weird kind of interface because the arm of the person became a plotter, became a printer, and you have still a computer system. It's just that sometimes when the computer system wants to output, for instance, output the wind flow, computed in that wind flow simulator, it uses your arm to output that, all right? And by the way, we did not invent, like my group did not invent this technique. This is this electrical muscle stimulation, which I'm going to refer to a lot in the talk. This is a long-standing invention from medical rehabilitation. It's typically used for recuperating people that might have some kind of muscle paralysis or even more complex things like spinal cord injury. What we're trying to see is what happens when you take this technique out of medical rehabilitation and try to create an interface with it. Let me show you another example that is very, very different in nature from this one that you just saw, in which case you see a user in virtual reality. And this VR is slightly different from the VRs that you might have experienced because this virtual reality right here has physicality, right? So he's not just interacting with a VR that is all ghost-like. When you put your hands out, you might see something really photorealistic and you're like, wow, I believe in what I see. But the moment you try to touch it, there's nothing there. There's no boundaries. There's no physicality. Things have no weight and so forth. Here, he's actually touching these walls, and these electrified walls are repulsing his hand backwards. And the trick that we're using is, again, we're using the muscle stimulation to create the feeling of a force And I just stopped the video here, but if you want, you can check all these videos on YouTube. At this point, the user was actually going to pick up a cube, and that cube was going to have weight, right? And so as he lifts it up, the muscle stimulation kind of pushes it down to render the force of gravity. It really feels like a heavy weight. Right, now the thing that you might be wondering is, why would one do that, right? Why is Pedro going around putting electrodes on people and calling this computer science and so forth? And so the reason why I've been investigating this is because I see a trend for the last, 10, 20 years of our lives in computers that I think is very interesting, which is that the computational paradigm, right, the size of the devices, the style of the devices we interact with, has been transforming super fast. Right. Normally when I give this talk to older folks, I start with like mainframe computers and large computers in a room and etc. With you all, I can just start directly in mobile computers because that's kind of like in the world that you were born. But you all know, because you've studied the history of computing, that things were bigger before. Computers were in our lap, and then computers in the 90s went to our pocket. And most recently, and I can even see that Yuji has one of those, computers started to become attached to our body, right? So wearable computers brought computers in constant contact with the user's skin. And now as a researcher, what I really have fun thinking about is, what comes after this? And so if you would take a poll and go to everyone in this room and, ask all my colleagues in human-computer interaction, et cetera, what's the next paradigm? One of the obvious answers to this is, well, these bubbles are getting smaller, right? The bubble of mobile was smaller than the user because the mobile devices are smaller. The wearable is attached to the user, and what's going to happen is that this bubble is subsumed, right? The device goes inside your body. And I'm not saying that that is not about to happen. In fact, that kind of has already happened in that we have all sorts of, implanted devices, like really important medical devices like pacemakers, insulin pumps, and even some interactive implanted. What I'm going to say to you today is that don't believe that's the only parameter that matters in the history of evolution of computing. I actually think that's a somewhat almost irrelevant parameter. More important than where the devices are with respect to your body is how much the devices overlap with your senses and actuators. And mobile devices overlap very little. You could hold them. Wearable device overlaps a little bit more because it can sense your physiology, because it's in contact with your skin, can take your temperature, measure your steps, and etc. And the new class of devices not only can sense things, but what I argue is that it will also be able to actually influence your physiology, influence your biology. Just like the devices that you saw with the muscle stimulation, we're actually able to influence your biology by actually moving your muscles, right? So the reason why I call these devices integrated is because, if I would ask you, point out all the hardware components of this device here that you see on the screen, you would say, well, a pen that is able to digitize, that has Bluetooth, a special paper, electrodes, and at some point you'd have to say, and the user's muscles. Because otherwise this device wouldn't work. Otherwise there would be no plotting, right? And so this integration is what I think is super interesting and I think is worth, dedicating my research time to. So let me talk a little bit more about this. I've investigated this at start with my PhD, and most of the initial question for me was a very interesting one, was can I look at the human body and add technology to it that is actually just utilizing things we already have there rather than just having to copy everything. So let me give you a very concrete example of that. In the field of robotics, a really cool way to provide that physicality to virtual reality, the feeling of forces, of boundaries, and etc., is to use these devices. They're called exoskeletons, right? A bunch of motors attached to a wall, and they can provide force. So if I touch a wall, it stops my hand right there, and I feel like, oh my God, there's a boundary right there, there's a wall. Now, these devices are very interesting, but they also have their limitations that you probably can see in this image. They're attached to a wall, they're gigantic, they're expensive, you're not gonna buy one, you're not gonna have one at home. They're very cool and very precise though. And so what I'm trying to think about is, can I use these integrated devices to look for ways in the human body with the least minimal amount of technology that I can do exactly the same thing, but without all these disadvantages. And so for instance, with the muscle stimulation, I found that we can kind of do the same thing, but all we need is a bunch of electrodes and stimulators, right? So here you see one of my earlier projects in which I was giving this user right here, my former colleague Xijing, and he's in this boxing simulator, and you can feel the punches from this avatar because his muscles contract in the right moment to give this sensation of forces delivered to him, right? And the device that allows you to do that is much smaller than that big exoskeleton thing, because honestly, all it has is stuff that all of you could play with. You could build this device today. There's nothing real complicated behind this. There's a microcontroller, a small computer with a Bluetooth, so the VR simulation can say, hey, this is the time to render the force of being hit. There's some batteries, there's a solenoid, which is an electromechanical component that also slaps your skin, so you can also feel like there was something touching you, not just the force, but also the feeling of touch. And there's the key component, which is the muscle stimulator that gives your arm the ability to involuntarily move, right? You didn't even decide to move. When you felt a punch from VR, you moved. And then there's the electrodes. And so when you put these two things side by side, you can kind of see that all we're doing is actually taking out hardware, which my colleagues in robotics have fun looking at this because it's a kind of a different way of thinking about it, right? Rather than adding an exoskeleton, which is, you know, a bunch of rods and everything that can move the human body externally, well, I just use the muscles to actuate the internal skeleton. And instead of actuating motors with, you know, chips and batteries and all that, well, I just actuate the muscles, which are kind of our motors. And instead of having really big battery packs that are very inefficient, because it's very hard to actuate motors through the laws of physics, you need a lot of energy, I'm actually kind of cheating a little bit here. And that's why my batteries are so small here, is because the energy for these muscle contractions, for the muscle stimulation, do not come from the battery. I'm really cheating. That energy from the battery just sends kind of a digital signal that tells your muscles go. And when they receive that digital signal, they're going to take the battery from your internal reserves of energy, and that's why I wrote carbs next to my mouth, because the stuff that you eat that actually powers this device. So that's why it's also so small, because I'm not really using batteries for it. All right. Recently, my student Jazz and I got very excited about, can we take this idea of replacing motors and apply it to other domains, not just rendering forces? Could we apply it, say, to the domain of rendering the sense of temperature, right? Could I be in VR and feel like the temperature is changing? So this is work from my PhD Jazz and my previous PhD, visiting PhD Stephen. So what you see here is a user in VR, and they're warming their hands in this furnace. You can see that they're wearing this little device close to their nose, and this is what's going to do the trick without ever changing the temperature of the outside air. I promise to you, they're feeling heat, and the air is at room temperature. The way we're doing that is that we're emitting a little chemical called capsaicin, which is the main ingredient in hot chili peppers. So when you eat chilies, it feels really hot because this chemical stimulates your nerve inside the nose called the trigeminal nerve. That is also the reason why you feel hot when you eat the chili peppers. So this is effectively kind of an illusion. And of course we can do things like, you know, fling the door open and comes a cool breeze from the outside world and we emit eucalyptol, which you might be thinking what it does is the same reason why breath mints feel very refreshing, and that makes you feel cold. And so you should be able to see the user walking outside in the snow and it's getting colder and colder. So we emit the eucalyptol more frequently, making the user feel even colder and even colder. And we can just keep doing this. And what you see is the tendency of the trick is rather than using, you know, an air conditioned unit in VR or a heat lamp in VR, which is really large, and it takes like a kilowatt of energy, and is not going to be wearable. You're not going to walk around with an air conditioned unit on top of your headset. We're just tricking your brain to think that the actual temperature is changing, although the temperature is not changing. And so we can do that wearably and just with a very small battery. So all the things I've talked to you so far, I kind of just only half of what I promised at the beginning is just that, well, we're integrating the devices with the human body. Well, we're only integrating half of the human body, which is the actuation side of it. Now we have devices that, for instance, via muscle stimulation, are able to move your body, and that can be used, for instance, to generate haptic feedback in VR, the sense of forces in VR, the sense of walls, and etc. But that's only half the story, right? If you wanted to think of my body as a new form of integrated device, like my hand becomes almost like a smartphone. It has its computation power. It can do things. It can represent variables. I can do computing with it. Well, I also need to close this loop. I need to have sensing and actuation in my hand. And so that's what we kind of did in this second track of our line of research. We're really trying to tease what I think is a more weirdo conceptual track where could we access information in a new way? So right now, the way that I'm communicating to my computer to click the slide change is that I'm using poses, I'm moving my fingers in a pose, and I'm hitting keystrokes, but my computer isn't using that language to talk back to me. It's not using poses to talk back to me, it's just using a screen. It writes things on a screen. So my question here is fairly conceptual. What if I would talk to my computer via keystrokes, poses of my body, and the computer would talk back to me using the exact same language, poses of my body? And so the first device that I build that I think does that is a very, very simplistic one. It can only move your wrist up and down, and that's the pose it can move. But it can move it in both directions. So the device can pose my wrist in any orientation to sort of represent that some value is changing, but I can also move it, okay? So both of us are sort of manipulating the device. So for instance, if the stock market goes up, which isn't really happening right now, the device would go up and inform me that prices are going up. And the way that we're kind of closing this loop is that we have what you've seen before. We have the muscle stimulation that controls the wrist, but we also have a very simplistic sensor right here. It's an accelerometer attached to my ring finger, which I can sense how my wrist is moving with respect to the rest of my body just by looking at that accelerometer, right? So now we kind of have a shared communication channel, and I can do really crazy things like this one. So here you see me giving a talk, and I want to play a video as I'm giving this talk, and I want to know where the video is, but I don't want to break eye contact with the audience. So what I do is I feel where the video playhead is, because my hand moves upwards very slowly as the video plays. And so if my hand's in the middle, the video's in the middle. If I push my hand down, because I'm still in control of it, the video rewinds. And then it starts playing again, and my hand starts playing upwards again, and I push it again. So I'm kind of just feeling how that video is playing rather than observing it. This was assuming that both me and the computer are controlling the same wrist, but you could do really fun stuff like, computer, you go and control my left hand, and I'll take control of my right hand. And you can play sort of a video game against yourself. This is that games that you play with two people called slapsies. Maybe you've played that with your friends when you were kids. And normally you need two people to play slapsies, but here you can play slapsies against the computer. Computer's trying to slap and you're trying to avoid. And obviously it's super hard because the muscle stimulation loop is much faster than your cognitive loop. So you don't really have a lot of time to react and take your hand away. All right. Now we've tried to tease out what new things could you do if computers have this ability to talk to you, not in means of images and text, but in means of poses. And one thing that we use poses a lot for is when we're learning how to manipulate objects, right? So here what you see is a video of an experiment that we did where we asked participants to come to the lab. We hooked up all the muscle stimulation, calibrated everything. It takes a lot of time. And then we asked them to do a series of tasks. And here's one of the tasks. We said, can you please take that spray can and paint that drawing? And this is what happened. And I don't know if you hear the audio track. If not, I can narrate along. So this user says, that was very cool. I would totally have forgotten to shake in it. So what's going on is that the muscle stimulation shakes the spray can for you, right? These are computer scientists, so they don't know how they have to shake a spray can. They all forget. And they pick up the spray can and automatically it starts shaking. And this user says, it tells me that I have to move it up and down like shaking. So here's a new way of learning things. Rather than learning by reading the instruction manual printed on the spray can, your body starts to execute those poses. And as it executes those poses, it tells you the instruction. All right. And we keep on investigating new ways of doing this translation or this transfer of information via poses. One thing is to inject information via poses to you. The other one that we're investigating right now is what if we just change your pose? So we're not injecting new information, but we're changing the way your pose is, the way you grasp. Here's a work that just got published. This is my student Jun Nishida and Cheney Wan and Zoe. And what we did is a small exoskeleton that is passive. So your hand is inside that glove, but there's small rubber fingers. So your hand becomes smaller. All right, so your grasp effectively becomes a very small grasp. You actually have a grasp of a 6-year-old, American average 6-year-old child. And now you're thinking, well, what would I do with a smaller grasp? Well, one thing you can do is you can design objects in a completely new way. So if you're a product designer, the way you're currently designing toys and stuff for children is that you're just imagining how it's going to feel like, or you're consulting charts that says average American 5-year-old child grasp is 9 centimeters. and you go and design your little toy to make sure that the grasping radius is below that grasping radius. Well, here you can just try things by yourself. You put this glove on, your body shape kind of gets transformed, and you can try all the ergonomics of physical products. And this is great for children. It's also great for folks that have, hand impairments and stuff like that, because you can kind of selectively lock different fingers and kind of see like, oh, if I didn't have these two fingers, what would happen? Can I use this fork? Can I use this eating utensil and so forth? So we're actually conducted a study and found out that people can design better when they have this tool. All right, so let me kind of roll back, summarize, and try to finish this talk as quickly as I can, because I'm probably running out of time. So I told you about one interesting thing, which is that I think we're trying to add less technology to the body by looking at this integration rather than just implantation. This does open new challenges that I think are super interesting and are going to be relevant for like the next 30 years. So if you're interested in HCI, think about one of the big challenges, which is the question of agency. These devices, both implanted or integrated, interfere with your biology. So they do remove some of your agency because the agency becomes shared. When I'm holding a smartphone, I know exactly where the boundary between these two entities is. Like I am holding this piece of thing. If this piece of thing is inside me or interfering with my biology, it becomes a little bit more enmeshed and a bit more complicated. And so this is kind of what we're investigating at the moment. I mean, we got really excited about the question of shared agency. So we've done all sorts of different things with it. We've done art pieces that kind of investigate that. This is a piece where, there's a sculpture that traps people inside, and try to see if I can jump into the funny part of it. It's a sculpture that traps people inside and kind of uses muscle stimulation to harvest energy from them. It's very scary and very dystopian. And the only way you can get out of this sculpture is if you seduce someone else to sit on the other side. And that person gets entrapped and gets muscle stimulated and gets energy harvested using a dynamo. And the sculpture lives on forever. And then it lets you go out. So we had this at museums and large art exhibits to kind of get people to talk about this question of losing agency to computers and shared agency. But we're also doing the other side of the work, which is, okay, can we actually do something about this? And let me ask you a fun question. I'll do this last 2 minutes as the end of the talk. I don't know if you can see, but there's baseballs flying out of this baseball thrower. Who thinks, and you can unmute your microphone and just say it. Do you think you would be fast enough with a video camera, maybe with your phone, to take a picture of these baseballs flying out of this device? Who thinks yes or who thinks no? I'm trying to see if I can look at people. Who wants to chime in? Fast enough to take a picture of a flying baseball or not fast enough?
No.
No, all right. No one said that, but no is a good one. All right, so let's see what happens when my postdoc Jun tries to do that. All right, so he did not make it. He got no picture out. Turns out the visual human processing speed is too slow. It's about 300 milliseconds to take a picture. That's too slow. The ball in 300 milliseconds has left your screen, the field of view of your camera. Question for everyone. Now that you know that I do all these things with muscle stimulation, how would you accelerate someone's reaction time so they could actually do this? Feel free to unmute your microphone and just go. How would you accelerate my reaction time?
Maybe do something like stimulate your muscles just a few milliseconds before the baseball is about to be released.
Sounds awesome. All right, so let's look at that, right? So we take a muscle stimulation system. You should be able to see one being strapped on right now. Put electrodes on you. Put a sensor on the tossing machine so you know when the ball is leaving the tossing machine, right? That's the earliest you can know that the ball is leaving. And when the sensor sees that ball, you trigger the muscle stimulation, right? That's kind of like the moment it's already leaving, you trigger, so all the latency you have is just physical latency of your fingers moving, right? And that controls the shutter button. So let's see what happens when we do that. So what happens when you do that is really, really interesting. You totally take an awesome picture. Look at that. The ball was just like coming out of the toss machine and you got a picture. But when we asked people, how does this feel? They said, it sucks. I didn't do it. The machine did it for me. This is completely fake. I didn't take any picture. This is kind of some superhuman device. It's better off just putting a motor and taking the picture automatically. And so we got really interested in this, and we ran a bunch of experiments. I'll just jump to the results. But turns out, if you accelerate someone too much, they'll say, well, that was not me, that was supernatural. If you don't accelerate them or stimulate them too fast, they'll say, well, that's not enough, I can't take the picture. And so there's something in between that is so fast, but so close to your humanly capabilities that your brain has a little bit of leeway with, like with everything, the same way when you see me speak, actually your ears are capturing the audio at a different time than your eyes, but they all synchronize very well because our brain is like, yeah, let's give a little relaxing forgiveness to this whole thing and say that this is all synchronized. And so our brain is going to do the same thing with that stimulus, that it's still a little bit faster. And we found out about 80 milliseconds faster is the perfect faster. And people take the picture. The ball is effectively a little later, as you can see in the shot right there. But what's surprising is that they swore to us that they did it, where we actually knew that it was accelerated by the muscle stimulation. So this is the kind of thing that we're trying to say about harmonizing these devices with the human bodies. Like, can we make it in a way that we feel like we're learning new things, but we're not just losing stuff. We're not losing agency. We're not losing everything. All right, jump over the brain stuff because it's less interesting. And just the takeaways are, I think this is really interesting if you're considering thinking of new paradigms in computing. Think of what comes always next, right? We're stuck with wearables right now, but what do you all think comes next? And I'm not saying that mine is the answer. I'm the researcher. There's never the answer. We're terrible at predicting things. But yours might be. You might actually have a better answer than the one that I have. And think what they're good for. I currently think that these new type of interfaces might be really good for physical ways of reasoning, right? Where we're reasoning not with just visual information and textual input, symbolic, but with physical ways of reasoning. Like I'm doing the plotting by actually feeling my hand doing the plotting. Do I learn better how to do things? And we think they're better for simulations, for learning how to do things, and also for empathy. Like if you're going to feel how others' bodies might feel like, it's probably better to feel that by moving your muscles and to have transformation in your body than to just imagine that on the wild kind of imagination. So that's it. I want to acknowledge my PhD advisor, Patrick. A lot of this work was done together with Patrick and all my amazing students that helped me do all this work. Thank you so much. And sorry for being 5 minutes over time.
Not a problem. Thanks a lot, Pedro. I mean, that is actually amazing. Every time I see you present, I'm amazed. We're going to hold questions to the end so that we can, so people can have one, they can have a chance to think about them, and two, they can ask you both questions at the same time. So I'll hand over now to Jason, who I think is going to do the next introduction.
Yeah. I'll turn my radio on. Hi. Hey, everyone. My name is Jason. I'm an undergrad at Chicago in the CDAC program. I had the pleasure of getting to work with our next speaker this summer on a project related to misinformation and misleading online content. So I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. Marshini Chetty, an assistant professor in the CS department at UChicago and the co-director of Supergroup, or Security, Usability, and Privacy Education Research Group. She is most recently the winner of the Privacy Papers for Policymakers Award, as well as the SUPE's Distinguished Paper Award. Dr. Chetty's research has historically centered around themes of HCI, usable security, and internet and networks. And today we'll get to hear more about her unique contributions to these fields. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Marshini Chetty to the Summer Lab speaker series.
Great, thanks for that great introduction, Jason. I was just wondering, I had a quick question for Pedro, which is how do I share audio?
Did my audio actually pass through?
Yes, it did. Oh no, it didn't actually.
So it did not. Yeah, when you hit share, there should be an option for audio on the top that you can enable or disable. Share audio from this computer.
Oh right, yeah, I didn't see that option, but I guess. Oh, share computer sound. Okay.
Exactly. Gotcha.
Okay, awesome. Got it. Thank you. It is always like, yeah, following Pedro is a tough act, but I will do my best. He has the best, most amazing slides and like amazing videos. So I'm going to be talking about something completely different. So essentially, I focus on helping people to use the internet in ways that align with whatever they need. So let me see, is this working? How do I press? Okay, apparently I don't even know how to get my slides to progress. Aha. Ooh, slight delay here on my slides. Okay, so basically I'm also in the field of human-computer interaction, and as Jason was saying, I work in this field of usable privacy and security mostly, but I also do work in developing countries and also work on sort of ubiquitous computing. Why do I sound like this? So I'm from South Africa. So I'm from the country of Africa, which has 54 countries, and I'm from the very bottom in South Africa. I was meant to be in South Africa this summer, but instead I get to come and speak to you today. So I did my undergrad and in computer science at the University of Cape Town. So this is an old picture of the University of Cape Town. I then went and did my PhD in human-centered computing at Georgia Tech in Atlanta. And then I was faculty at the University of Maryland. I also led the Princeton Human-Computer Interaction Lab before I was fortunate to join UChicago last year. And so I've officially been here for 1 year, and I will have been in Chicago for 1 year next week. So I have the pleasure of being part of the supergroup with Blaise Ur. This is our most recent updated photo to show and reflect our new reality. And I also have the pleasure of running this HCI club together with Blaise, Pedro, and Sarah Sibo. So here, if you're interested in anything that Pedro said, or anything that I said, or anything in human-computer interaction, please feel free to go to this website, sign up, and come to some other meetings that we're having on a bi-weekly basis. So now I'm going to go and jump into like, what do I actually do, right? So I mentioned that I work in internet transparency. I basically try to help people answer questions like, why is my internet so slow? Or, hey, what data is someone collecting about me? Or, oh my gosh, I just got a security breach notice. What do I do about it? And these are the kinds of questions that I try to help users with and try to sort of develop technologies to give them more information about what's going on and some control over that. And I've worked in a whole bunch of different areas. I won't have time to go through all of them, but privacy and security, internet performance costs are some of them. And then as Jason sort of mentioned at the beginning, I also work a lot in policy. So aside from doing research, I actually work with agencies like the Federal Trade Commission who regulate what you do online to see if I can actually help them figure out what is the best way to create policies that protect your privacy or have you get the best performance or make sure you're not paying too much for your connection. Most recently, I've also looked a bit at like misleading content online. So looking at today, I'll tell you about a project on helping you figure out if someone's trying to sell you stuff on social media. But I've also looked at other tricks that websites use called dark patterns to get you to buy more stuff, like saying there's a sale that's about to end. And most recently, I'm working with Jason, fortunately, to look at misinformation. So how do we actually see or understand information we get about, say, coronavirus, the pandemic, and things like that on social media platforms or messaging platforms like WhatsApp? I also do a lot of work in privacy. Most recently, I'll just say that I've been working to help kids learn about online privacy and security. And I'm kind of interested to see, how do we protect kids when, like basically there's so much technology and surveillance going on in schools? And also how do we actually teach them to navigate an online world as they grow up, essentially? I've done tons of stuff where I'm helping people with internet speed. So I've built some tools to help you measure, like, are you actually getting the speed you want? And then similarly, if you're sharing a data connection with roommates or your family and they're always like, hey, you're downloading too much stuff, I'm the one who's been trying to help you to actually see if it really was you or if it was someone else that's actually using up all the data. So I generally follow this process, which is called user-centered design. And basically, it's a process where we're trying to figure out, like, what do you, the user, need for your for your internet connection? Can I design something to actually help you with a particular problem? Can I implement that and then test out that intervention to see if it was something that you need? And this is very similar to the kind of approach that, say, Pedro was using in his work as well, with creating interventions and then trying to see, is this something that people like or not, and then making adjustments. This is kind of what it really looks like in process, where it's, we really jump between the stages all the time. So in terms of what I actually do, I'm just going to give you one example. in the interest of time, and I'm going to tell you about this project we did to help people understand when someone is advertising to them online. And we call this the disguised ads project. So I'm going to tell you about, like, first, how do we figure out what user needs are? So we're going to look at what we call influencers. So these are basically anyone on like social media who has a lot of followers that brands try to partner with. So we're going to look at this one influencer on YouTube. Hopefully you will hear this audio. You can nod if you do.
When I was a kid, all I ever wanted to be was a YouTuber. All I ever did was make videos.
Hey, who's this? Oh, it's me.
Funny enough, I was actually voted most likely to be a YouTuber in high school. And after I graduated, I made a promise to myself that I was gonna do it. When I was
Okay, so that was a YouTuber or influencer called Elle of the Mills. She's very popular. Maybe some of you know her. So Elle has about 1.6 million subscribers, or at least she did when I took the screenshot. And she was, you know, going through a rough time, I think last year or so. And she had like this video called, you know, she had like a YouTube breakdown. And she put up this video. You can see here, just this video alone had 1.9 million views. And what Elle is also saying in this video is that when she was having this really sort of depressed period in her life, she used a system called BetterHelp.com, which hooked her up with licensed counselors, and that helped her get through this really tough time. And she puts a link in the video description to say, you know, here's the link to BetterHelp.com if you want to use this service. What she doesn't tell you is that every time someone clicks that link, she earns about like 10 cents per click, right? So this is a form of what we call affiliate marketing, and a lot of people who are influencers on social media do it so that they can passively earn income. But the important thing here is that the Federal Trade Commission actually requires that Elle discloses this to you, but she doesn't say anything here about earning money if you click that link. So many other YouTubers were doing this, and it turns out that BetterHelp.com, this wasn't just a case of, you know, Elle's just like making money and not telling you, but actually BetterHelp.com didn't actually have licensed counselors, and so many people were getting into these subscription plans that they hadn't planned on getting into, and also just finding that they weren't getting paired up with people who actually had the right credentials. So this can have real consequences when you don't really know if someone's doing this kind of advertising. And we wanted to investigate this problem. So what we did was we basically scraped YouTube. We got about 500,000 YouTube videos. We also looked at a social media site called Pinterest. Maybe some of you are familiar with it, and got about 2.1 million pins. And essentially, we looked at all the video descriptions of those videos and pins, and we scraped all the URLs out of them, so all the website links. What we started to notice is that the website links that were affiliate marketing links typically have some sort of pattern that helps the brand, in this case, BetterHelp.com, know that it's Elle that's sending the traffic to their site, so they know who to pay. So we noticed that this was the clear case for all the sort of affiliate links that people use. So here's an affiliate link for Amazon, and here you can see that this tag parameter is basically identifying that Gohan the Husky is who should be paid. So we found a lot of these different patterns, and this helped us to identify, first of all, there are lots of affiliate marketing companies. Amazon is one of the biggest one. And there are lots of other ones that you may never have heard of, like Share a Sale and ShopStyle. But the interesting thing is because we can tell if a URL is an affiliate marketing link or not, we can actually then go back to the video descriptions and see how many videos actually have affiliate marketing. So we used machine learning to basically help us do this on a large scale. And what we found is we were asking ourselves these questions. So first of all, how much affiliate marketing is there? It turns out there's quite a fair bit in the random sample we took, but also how common are disclosures? Now, I know you can't answer me, but you can think about it for a second, is how common is it that people like Elle are actually trying to tell you that they're making money? Well, as it turns out, not that common. So only 10% of videos and only about 7% of pins actually have these disclosures that tell you that they're trying to make money off these links, right? And we also looked further into this problem and tried to figure out, okay, how do they usually try to disclose to you? How do they tell you about this? And we noticed there are 3 different ways. The first is what we call just affiliate link disclosure. someone will just say something like, affiliate links may be present. Maybe you never knew what an affiliate link was before this presentation. And as it turns out, from what I'll tell you in a second, is that many other people don't. So another way that people tell you this is using something called an explanation disclosure, where they say, you know, this is an affiliate link and I receive a commission for the sale. So that's a bit more explanatory. And then finally on YouTube, often people will say something like, bookmark this link to support this show, right? That was not on Pinterest. So now that we knew, you know, here are the kinds of ways that people are telling you this, and knowing that the Federal Trade Commission actually says you're supposed to really explain how things are, how you're making money off these links, we looked at how common the disclosures were, and we found that the most common type of ways that people disclose are usually saying just affiliate links are present, right? We did further testing now. So we wanted to see if we could design a prototype. So we first wanted to ask, do people actually understand these disclosures? And we ran an experiment on a platform called Mechanical Turk, where people basically either watched a video with one of these types of disclosures or no disclosure, or they saw a pin with one of these types of disclosures or no disclosure. And again, we asked the question, well, if you have one of these disclosures, which one do people understand? And we asked a bunch of questions. I won't go through that. Let's see what they said. So basically, the results of this experiment were that mostly, unless you're actually spelling it out and say, I make money when you click this link in an explanation style, people do not really understand it, right? So the most understood disclosure is explanation, but that's also the least commonly used one by influencers on YouTube and Pinterest. We did the final stage of the project where basically we took all this information and this ability to automatically detect affiliate links, and we built a browser extension which is available for Chrome and Firefox browsers. And we call this ad intuition because it basically helps you discover if something is pretty much an ad. So ad intuition, essentially, it has a banner at the top. If on the same video that I showed you earlier, it would detect that there's an affiliate link present. It will put up the banner to say in an explanation style and give you some information that there might be advertising or sponsorship in this video. And then it also highlights all affiliate links present in video descriptions. We also extended this because sometimes people might have a promotion code. So they might say, you know, go to betterhelp.com and use my promo code L of the Mills. And basically our system will also detect that. And then we ran a user study with this. We tested this. About 300 users saw this in the Mechanical Turk experiment, and about 472 users used Ad Intuition last year, and they just downloaded it and tried it out. And we also did an in-depth, what we call diary study, where we study how people use the tool in depth over a period of 2 weeks. And we found that essentially when they have an ad intuition, users are more likely to understand that someone like Al is actually advertising. Sometimes it's surprising because people don't expect it. And sometimes it makes them feel a bit more negative towards the content creator. And in general, it does actually help when there's a common disclosure on the video as opposed to someone having to search through a description to actually figure out if someone is being paid or not. So the major takeaways here, and to wrap up, 90% of the affiliate marketing that we found in that project was undisclosed. It violates the Federal Trade Commission guidelines on disclosing online endorsements. The most common types of ways that people disclose are the least understood and discouraged by the Federal Trade Commission. And also, it is possible to automatically detect and identify ads more easily using things like ad intuition. And this functionality could even be integrated into your browser. So your browser could actually tell you this if browsers wanted to adapt or integrate that. Of course, some browsers may not be incentivized to do so if they earn a lot of money out of advertising. So to wrap up, you know, this is pretty much what I do. I cover all these different areas. I'm really interested in a policy impact. Here are my contact details, which I'm sure that everyone can pass to you. And I also wanted to just say thank you for inviting me, and I'd like to also open it up for questions for both of us, I guess.
Thanks a lot. That was a great start to say, why do I sound like this? The amount of times I get asked if I'm South African, hopefully this will tell you guys the difference between our accents. Okay, open to the room. Who has a question? We've been so good with questions lately, I'm sure we've got a whole pile lined up. Chimobi, I see you pondering something with the bottom half of your face.
I have a question.
Helena, wonderful. Go ahead.
So I'm curious, how does ad intuition work? Like, what does it use to detect advertising?
So basically what we do on YouTube is we search through the video descriptions and we detect, we look at all the URLs in a description, and we can tell if that's an affiliate marketing URL or not based on the patterns we found. And then we're able to flag the video because we have some source of ground truth that that person has an advertising relationship. We don't look at whether people have actually disclosed verbally. We did some investigations of that. That is possible, and also it is possible on YouTube to click a box and have like a little paid promotion on the video, but we don't currently do that in the tool.
Okay.
I also had a question.
Go ahead, Chimobi.
Have you tried like finding a way to make it more accessible to kids? Because I know like a lot of YouTubers like the Paul brothers do a lot of marketing to kids without disclosures, and it's even worse for them because they're constantly like wearing like merchandise and things like that. Have you tried to find a way to make that more accessible to them?
Actually, like I'm super interested in that. So I did some initial research with some students just to see if kids understood advertising, and it seems like they don't really unless they've spent a lot of time online. And I think that that's a really good area for future research. So if you or anyone else is interested in pursuing that, we'd love to do that. And hello to your to the other person in the room there.
I had a question as well. My question is there any thought of either reporting this to YouTube or to some kind of officials to make there actually be consequences for the people who are essentially violating a law and tricking people into buying things that and not realizing that they're like part of some kind of scheme?
Yes, so actually we have been working with the Federal Trade Commission. So we've communicated all these results directly to them. We've also submitted what's called a comment on their legislation and recommendations around their guidelines for online endorsements, which is basically like a rule book for influencers that they can look at to say like, you know, here's what I should disclose, here's how I should do it. So we've just done that, and we did that like last month. So we're trying to sort of, you know, work directly with the regulators, but we haven't actually gone to say YouTube, because at the end of the day, unfortunately, the platforms are not liable. So YouTube as a platform is not liable for the content creators' advertisement, basically. So that's why they don't have as much of an incentive to sort of penalize people who are advertising, right? So it's kind of tough, but we're trying to figure out like what is the best middle ground.
I guess I have a follow-up question. So to detect which links are the advertising links, does it use machine learning, or is it some different type of model based on like patterns you've noticed?
Yeah, so essentially we have a class of, well, we have it's several parts. One is just using sort of like pattern matching. We can basically look at the URL and see using regular expressions whether this URL matches one of the patterns we have, right? The limitation there is obviously as there are new patterns that are not in our kind of pattern database, then basically we will not detect that. Something else we have is we have a machine learning, like a classifier that basically detects promotion codes, and we can actually classify whether there are promo codes in the description. And that we basically created from the data set that we had of the 500,000 random videos we had collected. So we're kind of using a bit of like a multi-method approach, but it's kind of like, if you know much about ad blockers, it's kind of like an arms race where, you know, the more an ad blocker blocks ads, like advertisers find other ways to kind of get around it. So it's the same with this. Like our current approach is a little limited in that if there are different patterns, we may not sort of flag that. If someone's disclosed verbally, you know, currently the extension is not able to detect or flag that either.
Okay.
I also have a question. I think it's related to both of your research. So I'm thinking about like device that's on your body. Is there any like potential security or privacy issue on that? So when I think about like for sensing, it can detect your like personal information from the device, and even for actuation, I can think about if like a hacker hack a device and they randomly actuate your hand, for example, by EMS, and it sounds like quite crazy in that sense. I'm wondering if there's any like research toward like the security and privacy around the wearable areas.
I think I will definitely let Pedro take that one, but this sounds like a great area of collaboration. Pedro, we have a research project to do now. I mean, definitely like huge issues around this, especially for medical devices, because people can kind of like, you know, interfere with pacemakers and so on. But I'll turn it over to Pedro to speak more about that. And yes, Pedro, if you're interested in that, I would love to work on that project.
Yeah, like I think this is if you're all searching for projects, I think it's always a good recipe to like look what's coming next and the problems that it has. And I think you identified it pretty well, Yuji. Like, you know, not only devices that only sense already have that problem, like pacemakers, insulin pumps. In fact, pacemakers have been consistently hacked over the last years in a positive way to demonstrate that they're not safe enough yet. And so those kinds of exercises, which the security community is very good at doing, are useful exercises to translate also for, like you said, devices that actuate the human body and robots that you carry with you, self-driving cars. The interesting bit about the kind of actuated devices that I do is that they all inherit the same challenges as self-driving cars and all that kind of stuff. It's like if you can get access to the device, you can make someone do something that might even appear that they're liable for, right? Oh, you pushed that person. Oh, you did this. You turn left, whereas it was the device that did that. So that's very fertile ground. I think there's a couple of different ways that you can plug into the layers of that. You can like tighten up the security layer, right? Just kind of networking, passwords, maybe biometrics that know that the device is really connected to the user and the user was really voluntarily deciding to do that. Of course, that all can be spoofed as long as the signals are digital. But you can also think of the reverse way, which I think is very interesting in HCI, and a lot of people haven't thought of it yet, which is if you have these devices, how do you instruct the device that you want to take over? Can you create fail-proof ways that you say, like, I don't want the device to act unless I am in this pose, or I am doing this, or I'll always have more force to the device, or I can do this. And so these strategies have never really been classified or like researched or found out which one is better than the other. That's super cool stuff, yeah. Maybe that's the project.
Any more questions, team?
I have one more question. I know this one's going to sound a little like dumb, but I just want to know how advanced could those what was it called again, the plotter machines for the arms, for the muscles, like how advanced could those get? Because I know this will sound dumb and all, but couldn't that really be used to help someone that like has, like you said before, like it can, like if you have muscle paralysis, it could help with them being able to use their muscles again. How much, like how advanced could that get? Like could they be able to move things around the room, like type with that?
Mm-hmm.
How would that work?
That's an awesome question, by the way. I mean, like if there's a majority of people that are working on muscle stimulation, they're working on it from that angle. They're trying to search for those benefits. The interesting bit is that the difficulties that they face and the difficulties that I face are exactly the same. So to answer your question, let me see if I can also answer it in two ways. I unfortunately think, I really don't want to say this out loud, but I unfortunately think that muscle plotter is one of the most precise devices out there, and its precision is really, really bad. Like it can't do very complicated things. And I'll try to show you a plot of it, and then I'll try to explain why it's not as good as everybody would like it to be. So, Chinmaobi, do you see the slides?
Yep, we see it.
So here's these things here on the right side are like a little study that we did where we invited people to come to the lab and we just asked them, can you put your arm like this and let the device do it for you? Don't do anything, close your eyes or relax. And the device was trying to plot to control their arms to plot these curves that you see here, right? So they didn't know what the curve was going to be like, so they couldn't really fake it. And so the other colorful plots that you see are what actually came out. So it's going all over the place, right? Now, the real accuracy of it, I had a thing that says it somewhere, it's something like 4 millimeters of error. It's not all that bad, right? If you think of it like, well, if I'm putting a cup down, if I put it down 4 millimeters to the left, that's not a big problem. So we're getting close to some of the things that you were hoping for. And I think those are going to be really important in rehabilitation. But some of those more minute and fine motor movements, like grabbing the cup itself, that's really bad. Because if you're off by 4 millimeters, you just miss the handle or you're not in the right pose to grab the cup and stuff like that. And the other thing is that drawing something on a plane is a very controlled thing. It's kind of on purpose that I set it up like that, right? Where your arm is completely stabilized and everything, so we're not controlling for how your arm is in space and everything. That being said, the moment we improve these things, the folks from rehab can kind of look into this and be like, oh, this is how you all achieve the 4 millimeters? Okay, here's how we are going to try that in rehab. I'm always really happy and surprised when like this paper gets cited not by HCI people, but by folks that are doing like biomedics and IEEE biomedical journal and things like that. I get real excited because I know which angle they're coming from. But to answer to your question fully, it's a really good question because you're asking, how do we beat this? How do we make it super precise? And so the answer is there's tons of awesome research spaces opening right there. So one of the reasons why this thing is not as precise is because we're stimulating with these electrodes from the top of the muscles, right? So we place the electrodes on top of the human body, but your muscles are under. And so we don't really know what the current goes through and does it actually get to the right muscles and stuff like that. And what happens is it doesn't get to the right muscles. It gets a little bit to the right one, a little bit to the wrong one. So it comes out a weird pose in the end where you wanted a very straight pose. And so there might be, people are thinking, even CS folks are thinking, what if we shape the signals that we send to the muscles? Can that help, right? What if we use some machine learning to shape the signals and try to get the right stimulation? What if we use a lot of electrodes and try to machine learn the proper ones? So there's a lot of really possibilities to try to find what can crack the code of stimulating from the outside, but reaching the right set of muscles. That's a really good question, by the way.
Yeah, these are awesome questions today, guys. So I guess we've got 2 minutes left. And so I thought the final question we might ask is something around how could people get into this sort of field in general? What sort of classes and things should people be taking if they're interested in doing crazy human robot wearables, injections, whatever Pedro's up to, or HCI privacy policy type questions that Marshini's up to?
I guess I'll start. So basically, to get into any HCI, I think you just have to start doing research, right? So even if you've not taken any of the relevant classwork, I think you could still happily approach someone, express what your interests are, what your background is, what your skills are, and try to get involved in something, because sometimes you can learn it basically as you're going along. That's typically what most of us as researchers are doing all the time. If you did want to take a class that could help you prepare for the kinds of stuff that I do, I would suggest taking something like the Introduction to HCI class that Pedro offers, or the Usable Security class that I'll be offering in the spring, as well as, we also cover a lot of HCI in the Inclusive Technology class that I teach. And there are other classes that Blaze offers, Diana Franklin offers, and Pedro and Sarah Sibo offer that would all kind of get you in the rough sort of domain, and you would easily be able to translate or transfer those skills into the kinds of stuff that I do.
Yeah, it's hard to add much more. I think that was the perfect answer. Learn by doing is really powerful, and then you can also fine tune and see what you really like. HCI is, it's almost weird to call it an area because it's just a million things, right? It's like it could have all the computing in it as long as there's a user. So, good luck. It's just like bigger than CS if you wanted to. And so as you're kind of navigating that, what I recommend, and this is what I did when I was, starting into HCI, is kind of see which spaces I get curious, and I try to sample different spaces, right? So I got excited about hardware, so I took a class that was more, or actually at the time didn't even take a class. I did what Marshini is saying, I just learned by doing. And then later I took a class, and then I got excited about designing questionnaires and user studies. So there I took a class because I really thought like, oh, I really like this idea that I learned from the user's experience rather than by looking at the output of my system or etc. And so, just try to fine tune that and sample as many points because it's such a diverse area. You can do so many different things. I mean, even what we both do is just a small subset of the whole space of HCI.
Yeah, awesome. And I guess it's a super exciting time for UChicago, given the growth in the HCI area of the department. We've got, 4 or 5 faculty now doing completely different things, each one of them equally amazing and exciting. So we could probably fill a whole seminar series with all the talks coming from the HCI group. So I just wanted to say quickly again, thank you, Pedro and Marshini. We very much appreciate you guys coming today. Those were 2 amazing talks. I would say the slides are going to be hard to beat for the rest of the seminar series. I think both of them were exceptional. And for the rest of you out there, if you guys have questions or you want to dig a bit deeper, I'm sure Pedro and Marshini would both be very happy if you emailed them with questions. They'd be happy to give you pointers to papers and things that are interesting.